to today's lecture on the age of the pyramids. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we're going to investigate one of the most transformative, groundbreaking, and undoubtedly monumental periods in all of Egyptian history, the Old Kingdom. Now, when most people think of Egypt, the first thing that comes to mind are the massive, mind-blowing pyramids at sites like Giza, Saqqara, and Dashur. But what's truly amazing is that these monumental tombs were erected over 1,000 years before King Tut, Ramses the Great, and Akhenaten ever walked the face of the earth. So whether you're looking to start a kingdom or you just want to design a tomb for eternity, journey with me as we investigate the Old Kingdom, Age of the Pyramids. The start of the Old Kingdom in Egypt is a bit strange. Egyptologists place a noticeable break between what they call the early dynastic period, dynasties 1 and 2, and the Old Kingdom, dynasties 3 through 6. And according to that chronology, the third dynasty of the Old Kingdom began shortly after 2700 BCE. Now the strange thing is that the first king of the third dynasty, a ruler by the name of Djoser, was actually the legitimate son of the last king of the second dynasty, Khâsekhemoui. So there wasn't actually any break in the royal lineage. We can see here Manetho's tendency to group rulers by criteria other than direct kinship. And Djoser's accomplishments ended up being so impressive that scholars have decided Egypt truly had entered a new era, the Old Kingdom. Now, by all accounts, Djoser's reign was long and prosperous, probably about 30 years long in fact. And it involved expeditions outside of Egypt proper into the Sinai and into Libya in the west. But what he's known for more than anything else is building the very first pyramid, the famous Step Pyramid, at the site of Saqqara. Now, Djoser's pyramid isn't just the first pyramid in all of Egypt. It's the very first monumental stone structure. And the arid climate has preserved it incredibly well for more than 4,500 years. So why build a pyramid? Prior to Djoser, Egyptian kings were buried in mastabas, small rectangular mud brick tombs. These were meant to represent the primordial mound, the first bit of dry land that emerged after the waters of chaos subsided. It was from this primordial mound that the gods and all subsequent life arose. Djoser's Step Pyramid didn't come out of nowhere. Instead, it's a natural manifestation of stacking one mastaba on top of another. So Djoser's Step Pyramid is essentially a symbol for the biggest primordial mound the world had ever seen. And within his pyramid, Djoser's body was laid to rest upon his death. This pyramid, and all the rest to come, served as tombs for Egypt's royalty, and vessels for their transference to the afterlife.
Right from the beginning, the idea of pyramids were a hit. I guess the Egyptians knew a good idea when they saw one. By the start of the 4th dynasty, only about 50 years after Djoser, a king by the name of Snefru began experimenting wildly with pyramids. Immediately upon taking over as king, Snefru began building his home, or in this case homes, for the afterlife. In all, he would build 3 monumental pyramids, and when you look at what happened to each, you'll realize why he needed so many.
Now, Snefru's first pyramid was built at the site of Meidum, more than 50 miles to the south of Saqqara, where Djoser built his pyramid. And I should mention here that all these sites are built more or less kind of near the ancient city of Memphis, the primary capital of the Old Kingdom. It was located in Lower Egypt near the modern-day city of Cairo. Anyway, Snefru came up with the innovative idea to pave the sides of his pyramid at Meidum, creating the world's very first true pyramid instead of step pyramid. Unfortunately for him, his architect wasn't that great, and he made the angle too steep. The pyramid collapsed upon itself, and Snefru had to start all over again.
Snefru tried again with another pyramid at the site of Dashur, fairly close to Saqqara. Believe it or not, Snefru's architect botched it again. He began building the pyramid at an angle of 55 degrees, and about halfway up, he realized it wouldn't hold at this angle. The angle was then lessened to 43 degrees, and eventually completed. But the resulting pyramid, now called the bent pyramid for obvious reasons, looked so dumb that Snefru couldn't call it home for eternity.
Poor old Snefru didn't give up though. He tried one more time, once again at the site of Dashur. And this time, he finally got it right. The angle is consistent, and the reddish hue of the limestone blocks gave it the name of, well, the Red Pyramid. And within the Red Pyramid, the internal passageways are far simpler than his other pyramids. And some archaeologists believe that the burial chamber of King Snefru still lies hidden within the massive stone edifice.
So the pyramids of Djoser and Snefru show the evolution of the pyramid architecture. From the step pyramid, to the collapsed pyramid, to the bent pyramid, to the actual pyramid. It was the pharaohs of the middle of the 4th dynasty, though, who perfected the construction of pyramids, and they did so on the Giza Plateau.
Now, we tend to think of the Great Pyramid as a singular thing, and it actually is. It refers to the pyramid of Snefru's successor, a pharaoh by the name of Khufu, at the site of Giza. But Giza itself has at least 10 different pyramids, 3 for the major pharaohs, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, and then numerous subsidiary pyramids for the queens and kids of those pharaohs. And the pyramids are just part of the Giza complex. In addition to these pyramids, we get funerary temples, we get the graves of workers, and of course, we get the massive, monumental Sphinx.
This all goes to show that a pyramid wasn't just an isolated structure off in the desert. Even though it was indeed a tomb for the king, it was necessary to have an entire complex of structures to administer the necessary funerary rites and rituals for the afterlife. At Giza, we have temples where the bodies would have been preserved. We have incredibly well-preserved boats for use in the afterlife, and we have giant causeways that link the pyramids to the funerary temples of the king.
Now, there are 3 major pharaonic pyramids at Giza. The earliest and the largest is Khufu's, rising more than 480 feet into the air and covering more than 750 feet on each side. Next, in terms of size and chronology, we have the Pyramid of Khafre. And you can always recognize Khafre's pyramid because this is the one that has the well-preserved, smooth, white limestone casing at the top of it. And all pyramids in antiquity, in fact, would have originally had this smooth limestone casing. But this has been lost due to looting and reuse for most of the pyramids in ancient Egypt. Might as well take something nice that already exists rather than have to redo it yourself. Then finally, we have the Pyramid of Menkaure, the smallest and latest of the pharaonic pyramids at Giza. We'll talk more about Giza in future lectures, but for now, just think of the massive amounts of resources and labor that the pharaohs must have been able to command in order to create such incredible tombs.
Besides being some of the most impressive monuments ever built by mankind, the pyramids have left us another gift: the pyramid texts. The pyramid texts are some of the oldest religious texts that exist from ancient Egypt, and they were completely unexpected when discovered. Only the later, smaller pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties contain these texts, which are completely absent from the massive pyramids at Giza, Saqqara, and Dashur. And so when the Egyptologist Gaston Maspero excavated a previously unknown pyramid of the 6th dynasty in the late 1800s, he went to the director of excavations of Egypt, a man by the name of Auguste Mariette, who completely brushed him off, saying that he must be mistaken because no text had ever been found on the walls of a true pyramid.
Now, the texts themselves often completely cover the interior chambers of the 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids. Let's go ahead and go inside and take a closer look ourselves. All right, so here we are inside the Pyramid of Unas, a minor king of the 5th dynasty. And we can see here that the inscriptions cover the walls, while the stars on the ceilings, they recreate the heavens. But what were all these texts? Well, they were magical spells, of course. The goal was to transform the deceased into someone who was worthy to associate with the gods.
Specifically, the texts were split into 2 groups: sacerdotal or priestly texts, and personal texts. The sacerdotal texts provide spells and rituals that were to occur in the afterlife for the spirit to be purified. The personal texts tend to be protective and nourishing in nature, giving the deceased the necessary food, drink, and safety necessary to make it to the afterlife.
Perhaps the craziest pyramid text is known as the Cannibal Hymn, and it was found in the Pyramid of Unas. Oh, okay, there we go. And it talks of the deceased feasting upon the bodies of the gods in his transition to the afterlife. It says, "A god who lives on his fathers, who feeds on his mothers. Unas is the bull of heaven, who rages in his heart, who lives up on the being of every god, who eats their entrails when they come, their full bodies of magic from the Isle of Flame." Really gruesome stuff.
Alright, enough with that creepy stuff. Let's get back to the land of the living. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom are just part of what made the pharaohs of that time so powerful. In addition to asserting their authority in the heart of their homeland, the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom undertook expeditions abroad, signaling Egypt's strength far beyond the Nile River Valley and Delta.
So Djoser, builder of the Step Pyramid, led expeditions into the Sinai Peninsula, east of the Nile Delta. And way down south, at Elephantine, near modern-day Aswan, he constructed, or at least he rebuilt, a temple to the god Khnum, the god of the source of the Nile River. And you might think that Snefru wouldn't have had time to go conquering with all the pyramids he was building at home. But nonetheless, he led conquests in Libya to the west and Nubia, modern-day Sudan, to the south. And with all of these expeditions, the kings were bringing back resources like cedar wood from the Levant, and cattle and prisoners of war and precious metals.
The builders of the pyramids of Giza also journeyed abroad. Khufu and Khafre and Menkaure headed into the Sinai and to the Red Sea, embarking upon mining missions. On rocks and cliff faces in those areas, you can still see the symbols of the Old Kingdom kings, having been preserved there for more than 4,000 years. A memorable journey indeed.
Perhaps the most interesting expeditions were led by the little-known king Sahure in the 5th dynasty. He journeyed into the Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, in order to procure the famous cedars of Lebanon. He then headed to the mystical land of Punt, somewhere south of Egypt towards the Red Sea, likely in modern-day Ethiopia or Somalia. And here, he loaded up with myrrh and malachite and electrum and ebony, and of course, lots and lots of gold. We'll hear about Punt again later, when the female king Hatshepsut meets the famous queen of Punt, known for her unique iconographic depiction on the walls of Deir el-Bahari. The Old Kingdom was undoubtedly one of the high points of ancient Egypt. Few people realize just how old, just how long ago all this happened though. The Great Pyramid dates all the way back to 2500 BCE, 4,500 years ago. Ancient Egypt would go on to last for another 2,500 years after the Great Pyramid was built. But these construction projects, they weren't just for fun, right? The pyramids were tombs. They were houses for eternity for the pharaohs of the 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th dynasties. And it was the job of the pyramids and the priests who attended those pyramids to ensure that the pharaohs made their way successfully to live with the gods in the afterlife. So keep in mind that things aren't always as they appear. A tomb might really be a political message, and a military expedition might be much more about economic advantage. Just a few lessons you can take away from the Old Kingdom, Age of the Pyramids.